Hello! It is finally time to fill this giant paint palette! I'm so excited. I've actually already filled it, which is why it's hiding in the box. I didn't want to spoil it before you get to see me squeezing all of the paint tubes into it, so I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get into it! Just to remind you, I bought Holbein's largest 108 palette of watercolors with all of these amazing tubes. These are 5mm tubes. Don't they look so beautiful in this box? And in my previous video, I managed to fit all of the paints onto one page and I made a dot card so that I could swatch all of the colours and see what kind of order they were in, because when I go to fill up my palette, I wanted to make sure I had the colours where I want them and not have any that just don't look like they go in that place. The original order is pretty good, but there were some that I really wanted to move around. Because I only have one shot at getting it right with this palette, the whole thing is one enormous piece of ceramic. It's very solid, and of course, the palette holes are fixed in place. So my first order of business was to get this tracing paper out, and I want to cut a circle out to match the dish, which really does look like a pie dish when I flip it over. I figured the easiest way would be to just trace around the edges of it. My camera was really struggling to focus because everything is so white, but eventually I got there, just using the palette as a stencil here to get the right outline. It's going to be a bit wavy, but it's close enough to a decent circle. It's so hard to see my line tracing here, but I'm cutting out the circle as accurately as possible. Easier said than done, really. But it worked out well in the end, and I've got a nice circle template here. I, of course, immediately moved it, so I've grabbed some washi tape here so I can just stick it down gently and not have this thing sliding about all over the place, because I do need to do some more tracing, and that is to get in all of these little palette holes. This just took me forever to do, as you can probably guess. This whole thing was such a huge project. But as I've mentioned before, I had one chance to get this right, so I'm really glad I took the time to do all of these extra steps, and eventually I traced in all of these little things. It's like a little beehive or something. The pencil lines are still very light though, so I wanted to make these darker, and I went over everything with a thin Sharpie marker pen. And here's my template. I think it's turned out really well. I was then able to trace this with my light box onto some nicer watercolour paper, and so I've ended up with a few different ones. I've got the general template there. I then traced out a draft copy onto some very cheap watercolour paper, because I knew it was going to take me a few goes to get it right, and here's my lovely one that I'm going to paint a bit later in the video, once I've decided the order of these paints. This is my draft copy, painted out exactly as it was on the dot card, and you can see what I mean, that some colours just don't really look like they go in certain places, especially those three pinks. I want those to be somewhere else. It felt like the pinks and purples had been separated too much, and I thought that those could really go together. There were yellows that were out of place. The blues are pretty good, but there were a couple that I wasn't quite happy with, and I just wanted to rearrange everything into a more logical order, at least Becky logic. Others may wish to have them in a completely different order to what I've ended up with. I swatched these from the paint that was left on the dot cards, so I'm really glad I thought to make one. It turned out to be extremely useful for this project, and now I'm going to cut them all up. I was debating whether or not I was going to do this, but I just thought it would be so much easier to move colours around this way, rather than trying to guess and getting myself all confused. There are so many colours here, and I just needed to spend time doing this the hard way. Do it once and do it right. That's what I'm thinking on this one. I can't even tell you how long I spent faffing about with this whole project. It took me weeks and weeks just to do different things. I gave myself plenty of time to think about the colour order and come back to it on subsequent days to see if I'd changed my mind on anything. And eventually I came up with something that I think I really like. Here it is, although of course these little pieces were loose and I ended up gluing them down because I did knock these all over the floor and had to start again. Oh my gosh, I just would have to do that, wouldn't I? And the very last thing I did to prepare this palette before I fill it is to write all of the numbers in Sharpie onto it, and I'm so glad I did this. That's meant to be the top of it, but for some reason when I was doing this it's kind of ended up on the side. Oh well, it doesn't really matter where they are. It's more because that eye design is affecting the circle and I wanted that to be up rather than just being over to the side. Not that it really matters once all of the colours are in, but I wrote all of my numbers onto my final painting sheet. This is on 100% cotton paper, and I drew that black arrow on there as well so I can keep track of how the paints are supposed to look on this thing. Now it's time to rearrange the paint tubes because they're still in the original order, and I knew the easiest thing would be to rearrange them into the order that they're going to go into my palette. It's just going to save a lot of time later. I can always go back to the original order because I have that dot card that I painted out as they came in the box. And I think what you're actually seeing now is the new order because I'm about to squeeze the tube, so I must have organised that before I filmed this part. And now I was psyching myself up to actually fill the paint palettes. These are pretty big wells, and I was thinking, how much paint do I squeeze in? I decided about a thumb tip's worth of paint is enough. I'm guessing about 1 mil or a fifth of the tube. I could have filled them to the brim, but I figured that would be so messy, so about halfway up is good enough, and I can always add more paint to these later. It's a lot easier to top them up rather than filling it to the brim and having the paint go everywhere, especially with this many colours. It's just better to have them sitting inside the wells rather than filled right up to the top. And here we go, I've done the first one, only 107 of them to go. This took me absolutely ages to fill, and I am glad I filmed it all because it is quite fun putting it together in super speed. In reality, this took many hours to do because of course I had to use my little pokey stick to make sure all of the paint was nicely settled in there. I wanted it to dry as evenly as possible. I was thinking to myself, why am I doing this? But it's too late to go back now, and I hope it's satisfying to watch. Here it is, all freshly poured, the most paints I've ever squeezed out in one sitting. And did I make a mistake with the order? I may have made one, we'll see that in just a moment. Really would it be one of my videos if there wasn't a mistake somewhere, but now it's time to swatch the paints once again and see how they look on this lovely piece of cotton watercolour paper that I have cut out so perfectly. Let's get swatching! I wasn't able to fit the palette on while I was doing this big swatch, so I've had to have it over to the side. I think I did this swatch the following day, so the paints were still very wet. I was far too impatient to let them dry first, I just needed to see what it was going to look like. And I've essentially set this palette up in rainbow order, but I have the blacks and browns after the blues and then I go into the purples, because there's just something that's always going to be out of place, especially in a circle like this. And some colours really do defy being put into any kind of order because they're either much lighter than everything else or darker, but I have tried to put these in as decent an order as I can. Some of the really pastel colours, for example, I ended up grouping together just so that they would be in one place rather than having one pastel in one place and then another somewhere else. And I just matched them into their colour groups, so the pastel orange colour goes in with the rest of the oranges, and the pastel yellow, you can see in the middle there, goes with the other yellows, but you can see how it still kind of stands out from everything else. I mean, it seriously doesn't matter. These are just little things that bug me, and I'm sure they bug other people too. But overall, I'm really happy with the colour order. I put in the earthy greens next to the yellows, and then I'm moving into the more bright and bluish greens. And I'm very glad I wrote the numbers on the palette itself as well as the swatch card, because it was so much easier to match them up. I kept losing track of where I was in the palette, and I've been painting with it a little bit. This is also definitely an issue, so those numbers have been very, very helpful. Now I'm going to be honest with you, I'm actually struggling a little bit coming up with painting ideas for this palette, and I think that's mostly due to the fact that there are so many colours here and I am extremely overwhelmed. So it might be a little while before I put out a full painting video. I just need to spend some time and I don't want to rush it. It won't be straight after this video or even in this video. Usually when I do swatches I'll do a painting as well, but this was just way too much and I thought, no, I'm going to save that for another video and take my time to get it right rather than rushing the painting too much. These colours are absolutely beautiful. The Holbein paints are top quality, and I'd say that the Holbein watercolours are definitely in my top 5 all-time favourite watercolours out there that I've tried, which is quite a lot. I'd love to know in the comments if you have any Holbein watercolours and do you like them. I know some of you have got the granulating ones, and that's probably going to be my next video because I have actually been painting with those too, and I have quite a lot to say about them. Now here is where I made a mistake. Numbers 155 and 138 that I'm just painting out now are in the wrong order. They should be the opposite way around. 138 is ivory black, and I should have put it with the other blacks, but it also looks quite brown, so that's why it's over there. I'm kind of wishing I'd swapped that around, but it really doesn't matter that much. I'm not going to go out of my way to change those. The paints have dried in the palette now, so I'm just going to have to live with it. And here I'm going into the browns and reddish browns, then moving into the reddish purples, and that will merge into the pinks and then into the reds. As nice of a transition as I could make it. What do you think of the order that I put them in? Would you put yours in like this, or would you have gone with something else? Not that I can change it or anything now though. There are some real pretty pinks in this collection. And eventually I'll swatch these with all of their names as well as the numbers. And here's my finished swatch for the palette. I'm really happy with how it's turned out, although I did lose it in the studio for a while and I finally found it again. I've scanned it now so I have a digital copy just in case I do lose it, and then I have to make another swatch card because I still have my template and it's easy enough to trace this out again. Holbein has some really luminous colours, particularly in the greens and blues, and I just love the whole palette. I think it's so beautiful, but yes, it's a little bit challenging to paint with it because there is so much choice, and as I move around, I'll just show you the two which I think could be in a better order. The ivory black and that greenish grey, I think they would be better if they were swapped around, but at the same time the ivory black does go with that dark brown colour, so it fits over there, but you see what I mean, it's very hard to know which order to put paints in sometimes. Other than that minor glitch, I think the rest of it's looking great. Now here's what the palette actually looks like now I've been painting with it. Some people were wondering if that eye was going to be a real pain in the middle of the palette, you know, for putting colours over the top. It's actually not that bad. I've found it's not particularly bothering me and I can still see the colours well enough. I did have another dish which I can put in there, but I've just been using the palette and I think it's perfectly fine. This is always going to look messy from now on, but I do love that about it. It makes me want to use things more when they're not quite as perfect and pristine. Overall, I think this has been a very successful project and I've had a lot of fun doing it. And like I said, I have done a scan of this and I'm hoping to upload this to my Flickr account so you can have a look as well if you want to see the order that I've done. This is a scanned image and I'll have that linked in the description below for you. Well, that was certainly an adventure. It's actually been a few weeks since I filled the paint palette, so the paints are pretty much dry in here now. Some of them have dried to a crack. Look at that one. Oh no! And there's a couple of others I know. I think the gold and silver have done the same over here, but most of them seem to be looking pretty good, and I definitely have to paint with these, but I do need some time to think about what I'm going to paint. I am so overwhelmed at how many colours are in here. Oh my god. gosh, it's just crazy. And I also need to pour out the granulation paints. I'm going to do that in a separate palette. If you saw my haul video, you will know which one I'm talking about. So that's going to be its own video. That's going to be upcoming soon. I've got so much stuff to film and do. So if you want to watch more upcoming videos, be sure to click that subscribe button and also give this one a thumbs up because it really helps out the channel. And I've got a couple of other videos up here for you to watch. I will see you all again really soon in my next one. I hope you're having a very painty day out there, and I'll swatch you later. Bye!